Hello there, folks, and welcome to Protestant in association with Limavady Area Ancestry. First, I'd like to extend my best wishes to the family of David Brewster, who passed away this morning. David was a key player in the Orange Order in the Limavady area where I came from, and a great promoter of history in this area, in the northwest. Now, today we're going to hear from Daragh, and he's going to chat about this book he's written on the rise and the fall of the Orange Order. So it's over to you now, Darren. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for the opportunity. So I'll just make a start here and give a bit of brief background just to the period that I'm actually looking at in the book. So it's just to fill in anybody that might not be that familiar with the setup of the Orange Order and how it came into being. So the Orange Order itself was founded in 1795 in the mid-Ulster area, and it was set up really in response to sectarian tensions and violence that occurred between Protestants and Catholics in that sort of immediate area. It was initially sort of an organization for the lower classes, the middle to lower classes. The upper classes didn't really bother too much about it until the 1798 rebellion. The order was used by the government to quash the rebellion. Orangemen were organized into yeomanry militia groups. They were armed by the government, and they did play a brutal part in quashing the rebellion in Ulster. Probably because of this help that they had given to the government, they do initially at least find toleration from the government. But there's always the sort of the problem is there that they clash frequently with Catholics, groups of Catholic ribbon men, secret society, Catholic secret society, and frequent clashes really, I suppose the most notorious or one of the most notorious was the Battle of Darragh in 1813. So this really is a big problem for the by now London government. One of their sort of main aims is this desire to pacify Ireland, to maintain law and order and make the running of Ireland as smooth as they possibly can. So it's always a sort of a constant itch there for the government. By the 1820s, really, this government tolerance is well and truly exhausted. They're fed up with the sort of the violence, the whole sort of tensions around marching season, for example. So although a good number of the upper classes have gotten on board with the Orange Order at this stage, because, you know, it's a bit dangerous to have a well-armed lower class group on the move. So there is a need for control. A lot of the elites do get on board, but they're always faced with this problem of how do you sort of align this with government tolerance, and this is always going to be a problem through the history of the Orange Order. So the government actually outlaws the Orange Order in 1825, by accident more than design really, because there's a law passed to outlaw Daniel O'Connell's Catholic Association. But as part of that law, O'Connell insists that the Orange Order also get outlawed. So it's pretty convenient for the government. They're more than happy to outlaw the order. So by 1825, the Orange Order doesn't officially exist anymore. And that is the case for 3 years until that particular act expires. In the meantime, Daniel O'Connell has sort of motored on, and he has pretty much sidestepped the government law, and he's able to create enough of a momentum to enable Catholic emancipation to be granted in 1829. It's a bit of a shock really to the Orange Order. They're sort of caught a bit unawares because they haven't been organized Well, they haven't really been in a position to physically oppose O'Connell and the campaign for Catholic emancipation. Yes, there was Brunswick Club set up, for example, but they were pretty impotent, really. They didn't really, the problem was they didn't have a physical force to stop O'Connell's movement. So Catholic emancipation granted in 1829, and it seems for a lot of the Protestant population that this is all part of a sort of a government attack on them and on their way of life and on their church. So things like the Reform Act, for example, where election reform is brought into being, these are all seen as, continual attacks by the London government. It feels like the government is abandoning the Protestants of Ireland. And when O'Connell begins his next campaign, which is the actual repeal of the Union, well, this really is something that a lot of Protestants are prepared this time around to stand up to and make sure would never happen. Repeal of the Union probably would never happen anyway in comparison to Catholic emancipation, but this time around, the Orange Order and various groups within a Protestant coalition are going to make sure that they oppose it. So they sort of take a leaf out of O'Connell's book and they organise mass meetings for themselves throughout the early part of the 1830s. For example, huge meetings held at Hillsborough and in Dungannon, for instance. So it's being made clear that there is enough Protestant discontent and enough muscle out there to make sure that this repeal of the Union thing is never going to happen. By the mid part of the 1830s anyway, O'Connell is now sort of in bed with the Whig government. He makes an alliance with them. He sort of agrees to drop the whole repeal idea if he gets other various concessions. Within the Whig government itself, the Orange Order is loathed by an awful lot of the actual key players. And of course, they've got O'Connell now in the midst of them. And he sort of is painting a bad picture of the order and telling the government that action needs to be taken against it. The government agrees to an extent and they commission an inquiry to be made into the Orange Order in 1835. It's a pretty seismic inquiry. What it comes up with really is not really of any surprise to anybody. It finds out, for example, how many people are in the Orange Order, what their organizational strength is, who are the leaders, things like that, things that are already common knowledge. But the problem is that they also bring to light the fact that there are Orange Lodges within the military. Now, this is a big problem because it could compromise national security. Probably wouldn't ever have, but the potential was there. And this was just what the government needed to bring about the disbandment of the Orange Order. There's also a plot floating around at this stage to assassinate the then Princess Victoria, who is heir to the throne. It was a bit of a fantasy, really. It was never going to come to anything. But again, that is also something that they could use against the Orange Order. So it was looking likely that the government would take the decision to ban the Orange Order. But before that could happen, the leadership, who are of course all elites, they take the decision themselves to wind up the order in 1836 in order to avoid the embarrassment that would follow if the government actually banned their organization. So in 1836, 40 years after organization, after the setup of the Orange Order, 200,000 members probably throughout Ireland, the order is officially disbanded. So Is that the end of the story? Well, as we know, not exactly. Because for the lower classes, the need to continue with their activity was too great. The whole idea of the whole fraternal aspect of the Orange Order, like any sort of association that was in existence at the time, this was just too important in their lives to simply drop it. They're not just going to walk away because the Grand Lodge of Ireland in Dublin tells them to. They're not going to suddenly cease their Orange activities and their meetings and their get-togethers. Way too important. The upper classes, they do try to set up new Protestant associations. So you get groups like Protestant conservative associations, for example, being set up, but they're not of any use to the lower classes because of the class barriers in place at the time, because of the costs, the money, for example, needed to join these associations. They're no good to the lower classes. So they're quite happy to carry on with their own activities at a local level, while the better classes generally backed away at this stage. They didn't want to sort of fall out with London. So they're backing away, but the lower classes still carry on very much with their previous activities. A new Grand Lodge of Ireland was formed in Armagh in 1836, but it really wasn't of any real importance. It could actually form because the government had never actually banned the Orange Order, but it wasn't of any importance. Rump organisation really didn't mean a whole lot to the rank and file membership. It was pretty, unimportant as far as they were concerned. Yes, parades and processions were greatly curtailed during this time. No real organisation, and of course they were breaking the law at this stage also. So for these few years, the parades and processions, all that pomp and colour is all pretty much gone. But away from the public eye, this whole social and fraternal aspect does continue and very much remains strong, especially in the Ulster area. So you would wonder at this stage, well, if everything's okay at ground level, if they're happy enough to continue, why was there a need for a revival of the Orange Order in the 1840s? Well, there really is a lot of stuff going on at this stage in the wider context. So for example, the repeal campaign comes back onto the plate again. There's a new Tory government in power from 1841 onwards. Naturally enough, Daniel O'Connell's not going to sort of have anything to do with them. So once he's out of his sort of cozy position with the government, well, the first thing he's going to do is start up his repeal campaign again. That's exactly what he does. So you've got the repeal campaign moving into full swing. You've got these monster meetings happening throughout Ireland. Like I said, repeal of the Union is something that's not of any interest to the vast majority of Protestants in Ireland. Coinciding with this is an upsurge in Catholic Ribbon Society. The Ribbon Society mistakenly believed that O'Connell could sort of be the saviour. He could be the guy to lead them. Of course, O'Connell, with his non-violent ethos, doesn't want anything to do with these guys, but there does become an upsurge in attacks and in violence with the Ribbon Society. So this upsurge in Ribbon activity is also sort of bringing about the need for some sort of a defence force to be set up. Economic recession is also a big part of the whole sort of wider context. Since the Battle of Waterloo, really, and the ending of the Napoleonic Wars, the country really has been an economic recession, and it really has hit the linen sector of Ulster pretty badly. That and the mechanization that is brought about by the Industrial Revolution. So it really is a sort of a shifting ground underneath the feet of the lower classes. A lot of sort of moving to the bigger cities, especially Belfast. A lot of emigration as well. Well, that had been a Protestant thing for the previous 100 years anyway, and it did continue at this point. You also have religious revival at this stage as well. So again, from about the 1820s onwards, there's a new sort of a sweep of evangelical zeal coming across from America and affecting Ulster. That does have the effect of creating something of a polarization between Catholics and Protestants. So there was this feeling against this background that yes, some sort of a defensive force was needed, that the Orange Order needed to come back into being, and the time was now right. 8 years on from 1836, this time is now right to revive. You also get the fact that the government is happy enough at this time to revoke the Party Processions Act, which banned the parades and processions. So again, it's a good time to make this decision to revive the Orange Order and the Grand Lodge of Ulster in particular. So this new Grand Lodge of Ulster, it gets established in Coleraine in February of 1844. The upper classes aren't prepared to get involved at this particular stage. Again, they're having to keep one eye on London. They're having to keep an eye on the elite circles that they actually move in themselves. They're not going to get involved in the Orange Order as yet. The result of this is that the new Grand Lodge of Ulster is backboned by the lower and middle classes. These are the guys that are running it. No upper class involvement as yet. So local lodges around Ulster, they're happy enough to align to this Grand Lodge of Ulster. 1844, they don't engage in any of their summer processions. They're warned off, especially by the newspapers and by the elites, not to get involved in anything that might cause trouble or lead into clashes with Catholics or with ribbon men. So they do hold off at this early stage. But at the same time, the relationship between the better classes and the lower classes, it has been on the slide for the previous sort of 40, 50 years. It's not as solid as it used to be in, say, feudal times or whatever. Things have been happening that have led the lower classes to ask more questions and wonder, do they actually owe their undying allegiance to the better classes, or can they sort of manage to make their own decisions every now and again? So for the upper classes, issues they have are that the violence associated with the Orange activity is their main problem. So for example, in 1845, parades did occur and clashes in Armagh led to the death of one Catholic. So how can they explain this to the better classes in London, in the circles of government, etc.? Pretty much impossible for the London government to understand the sort of ins and outs of somewhere like rural Ulster. The government is still pretty suspicious of the order. It's still not that tolerant, but they're prepared to let them go at this stage. albeit that magistrates and government officials who would happen to engage in order activity were removed from their positions. So this has all been going on since the 1830s, when Robert Peel set up a new law and order system in Ireland and tried to remove a lot of partisan people from positions of influence. So for the better classes, it's a pretty delicate balance that's needed. It's hard to sort of, well, if they want to rejoin the order, yes, but at the same time, they've got to keep an eye on London and, manage that side of things as well. So they're just not prepared to get on board as yet. This all changes to a certain degree with the James Watson case. So James Watson was a magistrate and he was a veteran of 1798 on the government side, of course. So he leads the parade in Lisburn, which wasn't really, it didn't end up in violence or no clashes or no problems with this parade in Lisburn. But the problem was, from a government angle, he's also a deputy lieutenant of Antrim, and he also serves as a magistrate. So he has to be removed from both these positions because you're not allowed to be engaging in orange activity if you're holding any of these government positions. So his removal from these positions, it really sort of unleashes a furious reaction throughout Ulster and the Protestant community. There's a good number of huge meetings and gatherings and rallies held throughout the province, and it does become something of a galvanizing issue for Orange men of all the different classes. There is a lot of disgust at the fact that Watson gets removed from his position, and it does lead to calls for a national revival of the Orange Order, and hopefully from their point of view, the elites can get on board at this stage. So with this in mind, there's a meeting held in Enniskillen in August of 1845. But this now is where problems start to begin. This is where the class issue comes into place, because the Grand Lodge of Ulster, which is made up mostly of the middle and lower classes, the delegation that they send to this meeting in Enniskillen is pretty much shunned. They're locked out of meetings, they're not involved, they're not consultated, and they're sort of left feeling that they're just being totally left out. The elite classes, the better classes, look like they're determined to run this new national Orange Order, and they're just going to trample over the Grand Lodge of Ulster. For the elites, what has to happen really is that the Orange Order will be able to remain legal at all times. They have to stay within the law so that London can never say to them, well, we're passing this act and this is making you illegal. So they hire a barrister to go over all the sort of legal ins and outs. They even sort of put it out there that the name, the Orange Order, might be changed, which really is sort of a red rag to the lower classes. They see that the order can only be revived in its previous sort of manner. It has to be the same Orange Order that went out of existence in 1836, not this new watered down thing that the upper classes are sort of trying to bring about. So the upper classes, they do revive the Grand Lodge of Ireland in August of the following year, but without the Grand Lodge of Ulster on board. So at this time, okay, around about 1846, you've got basically two Grand Lodges in existence. You've got the Grand Lodge of Ulster with the lower classes. You've got a new Grand Lodge of Ireland with the upper classes, but there's not that many of them involved at this stage. I mean, they've only been able to fill 19 positions in the organisation, which doesn't really say a lot for the popularity of it. So still very much a skeleton Grand Lodge of Ireland, whereas in comparison, the Grand Lodge of Ulster really is the orange body in Ireland at this stage with the popular membership. This now has been played out against the backdrop of the famine. The famine badly affects Ulster a lot more than previously has been thought, and that's been redressed at the moment, that sort of thought. But the famine was pretty devastating for a lot of areas in Ulster. The landlords didn't really exactly kill themselves in providing assistance. Some were quite good, yes. Others totally useless, some in between. So again, this is something, the relationship between the landlords and the tenants, again, this is straining it a little bit because there's no real sign of much assistance being given by some of these landlords at least. The famine, of course, does naturally curtail orange activities, but it didn't stop it. They're still able to keep meeting, although at a much lesser level, and they're still able to carry on with their parades. So, for example, 3,000 turn up for the parade in Belfast in 1847, 1,000 in Lisburn the same day. A lot of the members that did take part did donate to charitable funds, but there's no sort of concerted attempt to raise funds by either the Grand Lodge of Ulster or the Grand Lodge of Ireland. So it's very much up to individual lodges and individual members to try and raise funds. Warnings were given by the newspapers, especially not to assemble in large groups. Naturally enough, spread of things like typhus, for example, was a real danger. Some people obviously don't bother with these warnings and carry on. The occasion itself, pretty solemn. There's no colour, there's no music. Everybody stays pretty much sober. So it's a solemn occasion, but many people aren't able to participate just because of their physical condition and the state that they happen to be in at the time. And I suppose the whole problem with parading during the famine for a lot of people is that you're seen to be mocking God by doing this. And there's this almost total belief that the famine is the divine retribution of God. If you do something like parading, well, you're sort of, turning your nose up at him, and it's, looked to be really bad for him to do it. So again, the upper classes are staying well away. They're not getting involved. It's the lower classes that are, some of them at least, still wanting to carry on with their parades. So another thing really that sort of, undermines the sort of sliding relationship between the upper and the lower classes is this whole idea of tenant right. And one of the things that has undermined this relationship for the past few decades is the fact that the security on the land has been steadily in decline for the past 60, 70 years probably. So things like land leases, for example, they're just not being granted anymore, or they're being drastically cut down. New farming methods, for instance, like enclosure, those sort of modern methods, they are impacting badly on the tenants who are living on the land. And of course, it has to be realised the whole pressure of the population is huge, especially around mid-Ulster, the real sort of crowded conditions, people living on little or no land. So things are getting worse and worse for the ordinary tenants, and the government makes a decision to hold an inquiry into the land in Ireland. The Devon Commission publishes its findings in 1845. One of the things that they say is that the Ulster custom should be done away with. So this is another one of these government reports that's pretty much a whitewash and doesn't really understand the situation at ground level. So what's the whole situation? And there are evictions happening throughout Ulster. The Ulster Tenant Right Association is formed in 1847. One of their main things is seeking the legalisation of the Ulster custom. So this Ulster custom, it does provide some security on the land because it means that the outgoing tenant can receive payment from the incoming tenant. And it was something that facilitated an awful lot of emigration for Protestants, especially in the previous century or so. So legalisation of the Ulster custom is the main sort of driving point. This Tenant Right Association is especially appealing to the Presbyterians of Ulster. So people shouldn't sort of fall into the trap and think that Presbyterians and Church of Ireland members were all much the same. Big differences in ideology, relationships not always that great between Presbyterians and Church of Ireland. So for Presbyterians, this is quite a sort of an association. If it can dig away at the sort of position and power of these landlords who are all pretty much Church of Ireland, anything that can undermine them and have a dig at them, that's going to appeal to a lot of Presbyterians. So the Tenant Right Association, led by William Sharman Crawford, a former MP, and a newspaper editor from Derry called James McKnight. So they're able to hold demonstrations throughout the province. They're able to attract probably 10 to 12,000 for some of these meetings, and they're able to sort of bring about a form of cross-religious unity. And a lot of the lower class Orangemen do take an interest in this idea of tenant right because they're being affected by it. And a lot of them do attend these meetings and show support for Sharman Crawford and McKnight. So the association does gain a bit of momentum, and the hope of the leadership is that the 1848 12th can be used to highlight the issues of the problems of land. This works out okay in McKnight's sort of heartland, North Derry. It's successful in that North Derry region. So, for example, at the Garva parade, McKnight is sort of taken in on horseback and given a hero's welcome. 20,000 Orangemen in attendance. They all seem to be in support of tenant right. McKnight's allowed onto the platform, and the district master makes a speech sort of endorsing tenant right. So it works out well in that sort of North Derry area. But unfortunately for the association, in other areas, protest is sporadic. It's more sort of an individual thing. Some Orangemen do try to raise it, but they find themselves getting basically thrown out of the field, being told to sort of shut up, that sort of thing. So they're not really able to make any progress outside of the North Derry area. Some Orangemen consider that the 12th isn't an appropriate day for raising a protest issue like tenant right. So it doesn't really work. The idea of Sharman Crawford doesn't really work out. And he's pretty much in despair, and he blames the elite classes for the failure of the 12th to be a rallying day for Tenant Right. He blames the upper classes, he blames the landlord for bringing up the old no popery cry again, and for sort of, as he says, sacrificing the interests of the people and the welfare of the state. So obviously it suits the landlords to sort of trample down the Tenant Right Association, and they are able to do it to an extent by bringing up this usual sectarian cry, the usual thing that it's all a papish conspiracy, that you need to be careful when you're dealing with these Catholics because they will stab you in the back in the end. So really that is the watershed for the Tenant Right Association. It does continue, but pretty much without the support of Orangemen. The issue itself, it gets shelved in the early 1850s. It sort of just fades away really, and it doesn't sort of re-emerge until the 1870s, where some Fermanagh Orangemen do get involved in it, but they're quickly told by leadership at that stage to cut it out and not to have anything to do with it. So this really is a big opportunity for possible cross-religious unity, common issue for all members of all religions, could have turned into something big, but it doesn't work out, it evaporates, and the old sectarian card comes back into play yet again. Another sort of a thing that comes up at around this time is the possibility of yet another rebellion, this time by the Young Ireland group. This is a group of former O'Connellites that get fed up with his ideology and break away. They seek a break from the United Kingdom completely, so an independent Ireland, which was much more than O'Connell actually was looking for. And they are prepared to use violence to achieve it if need be. Again, as in 1798, the leadership is pretty much mixed. It's cross-religious leadership, and they do have a sort of a feeling that they can bring Orangemen on board, and they do travel to Ulster to try and talk with Orangemen at their meetings. This is something that O'Connell never really bothered doing. At least the Young Ireland group are prepared to engage. But it doesn't really have any effect. There's no desire within the Protestant community to break with the rest of the UK at this time. And in fact, it really just inflames Orange opinion. There's a lot of scaremongering going on. There's all these wild reports of rebels training in the mountains and arming themselves with all sorts of guns. And I suppose you have to realize it's only 50 years since 1798, so that still is in the popular memory. So again, there's a lot of sort of the Orangemen are being whipped up again by the better classes, who are in a bit of a position of panic, really. They're bombarding Dublin Castle with offers of support and requests for arms and requests to set up militias and things like this. So Dublin Castle doesn't need their assistance. Dublin Castle knows already that the Young Ireland group isn't in any real position to pose any threat. So the rebellion on the 29th of July, a total failure, Orange assistance not needed, and the whole thing sort of peters out really. But one of the effects of the Young Ireland Rebellion is that the better classes now take it on themselves to flock back to the Orange Order. It's now sort of okay for them to join the Orange Order because they're holding the sort of higher moral ground in comparison to these rebels that have tried to sort of break away from the Union. So the better classes now can come back to the Orange Order. And there is a huge turnout on the 12th, for example, and a lot of them are able to be seen on the platforms and taking up their old positions again. And they have sanctioned really armed resistance for the lower classes. They've always been hampered by the fact that they haven't been allowed to stand up to any perceived Catholic encroachment. But now, this time around, the elites have sanctioned it, and they have said that, you know, you can actually physically fight against anything that might come in your way. This hasn't always been the case. So it does bring together a sort of a new unity within the Protestant population, or the Orange population in Ulster. And because of this sort of new unity that's there, and the whole idea of a common enemy being out there and the need to stick together, the Grand Lodge of Ulster does meet to consider an amalgamation with the Grand Lodge of Ireland. Eventually, the following February, they do agree to a union, and by the summer, the Grand Lodge of Ireland is back in full control of the Orange Order. The Grand Lodge of Ulster is pretty much gobbled up, and the middle and lower classes are sort of put back in their position again. But the Grand Lodge of Ireland now is legitimately the body of Orangemen in Ireland, just as it had been in 1836. So it really did take this rebellion of 1848 to bring about this new unity. Two separate Grand Lodge, or grand sort of organisations, one in Ulster, one in Dublin, they had been sort of ambling along. Dublin in particular, not really going anywhere. So it's a rocky enough road back to unity since 1844. Things didn't always go well, but by 1849, yes, the Orange Order is back to its former organisation again. They've got sort of a reserved government acceptance. The government didn't need them, but they did have to acknowledge that, well, yes, you were here if you were needed. So they have a sort of a reserved government approval. They're back together again as one united body. So what possibly, you would wonder, could go wrong? Well, what goes wrong is the issue of Dolly's Brae. So it is a period of expansion for the order. Lots of new members come on board, especially from amongst the better classes. The problem is, especially though, ribbon men, they haven't gone away, and especially in County Down, there's a lot of ongoing tension between the Orange men and the ribbon men. So at Rathfriland, for example, in 1848, the ribbon men are able to stop the Orange men from carrying on in their parade. This is considered a great victory for the ribbon men that particular year, and they're not slow in letting the Orange men know about their victory for the next 12 months. In between times, there are clashes, there are deaths in clashes between Orange men and ribbon men. So by the time of the 12th of July, 1849, there really is a lot of tension in the air. It is a sort of a powder keg, really. And this time out, after 12 months of humiliation, the Orange men are determined to persevere on their march. So their march brings them to the domain of Lord Roden. On their way home through the mountain pass, they meet the ribbon men who are determined to stop them. This time out, it's a rout, and the ribbon men are pretty much chased from the battleground. This is a great victory, another one of these great victories that seem to happen around this time, widely celebrated by local Orange men. Their sort of honour has been restored after the humiliation of the previous year. But in the wider picture, this really is the last thing that the Orange Order needs. Because the government is absolutely furious at what happened. This is the very thing that has turned them against the Orange Order in the first place. Violent clashes, loss of life. This is something that just cannot be tolerated if a peaceful Ireland is to be sort of brought into being. So Roden himself and the Orange leader, they try to downplay this whole incident and say that it's not really that serious. Roden and the magistrates, the local magistrates, the Beers brothers, they take the full brunt of the blame and they're stripped of their positions of authority. And again, this is something that infuriates an awful lot of Orange men throughout the country. Lodges do flood in with petitions of support, but they're not really of any use. I mean, there's nothing that these petitions of support are going to offer to Roden or the Beers brothers. Not really much defence is offered in Parliament. So for the likes of Colonel Werner, for example, MP for Armagh, there's not really a whole lot that he can say in Parliament to defend these actions. Party Processions Act, as you'd imagine, is revived pretty much straight away. So makes it illegal now again to parade or have any processions. So a new sort of a legitimacy is needed again for the leadership. The leaders do try and choose a political route. They try and sort of organize themselves at a better level politically, and that is borne out in the 1852 elections where they pretty much clean up in Ulster. Even Sharman Crawford is defeated in his local area. So yes, the leaders do go on a political route to sort of try and plead their case. But once again, this is of no interest or any real relevance to the rank and file of the Orange Order. What's happening in London and the social circles in London or Parliament is a world away for them. It means little or nothing in their lives. So some of the lodges, they just say enough is enough. They wind themselves up. Some are genuinely disgusted by what happened at Rathfryland and they say, we don't want to be part of this anymore. A few, not many, but some did. Others then burnt their actual warrants in anger, more so in anger at the government. They're refusing to guarantee their future loyalty to the government and their warrants are worthless as far as they're concerned. Most did continue, however, most at a ground level, most Orangemen did continue, although the processions discontinued, obviously, and the 1850s, 1860s, generally quiet, although, yes, sectarian riots in Belfast in 1857 and 64, whipped up by the likes of Hugh Hanna, for example. The government is forced to bring in a Party Emblems Act in 1860 in response to riots at Derrymacashe. But it really is a sort of a quiet enough time, generally anyway, in Irish history from about 1850 to 1870. Not a terrible amount happening. It's during this period that you see the rise of William Johnson of Ballykilbeg, who rises to become the Orange champion. He's not an elite figure, he's only a minor landlord, but he becomes the Orange champion pretty much in the 1870s. You get an independent Orange Order founded by Thomas Sloan in the early part of the new century, with links to the whole labour movement, but not really a great deal happening around this period. You probably could make the argument that the better classes, the elite classes, don't really take over leadership again of the Orange Order and obedience of the lower classes until the passing of the Third Home Rule Bill. So for the previous sort of 50, 60 years, relations do tend to sort of stay a little bit strained between the better classes and the lower classes. So just to finish up, really, by 1845, the ground was ripe for a revival of the Orange Order. Economic recession in place, you've got ribbon threat, you've got the repeal organisation, religious revival, a lot of things going on in the background. Society really changing at a pretty rapid rate at this time. So yes, 1845, the time was right for a revival of the order. And the revival was able to proceed eventually, despite these obstacles being in place, despite these class differences, class snobbery, things like that sort of between the classes did provide an obstacle. Other things, of course, then famine, for example, the issue of tenant right, the Young Ireland Rebellion, those things were all sort of speed bumps in the way to revival, but they were all overcome, and the Grand Lodge of Ireland was able to take control of the whole organisation by 1849. So it looks at this point as if, yes, the Orange Order can make its way back to its position of strength of the 1830s, when there was about 200,000 members. Everything looking good until Dolly's Brae, and the whole thing blows up in their faces and really sort of puts them on the back foot again. And it was something they didn't really recover from for probably another 50, 60 years. So that's the end of it now. That's the end of the talk. So I hope you are enjoying that.
That was excellent, Darren. Thank you very much for that there. Very, very informative.
Yep.
I have a few questions here for you, if you don't mind asking, if that's
Right.
okay.
Yeah. Yep.
I suppose my first question is, in 1828, when it was outlawed,
Yeah.
did the organisation then go underground? And if it did the authorities ever clamp down, or was any arrests made or anything like that there?
Yeah, 1825, it was outlawed for those 3 years, came back into being in 1828. It did pretty much go underground. At local level, it carried on. Obviously, the elites couldn't sort of seem to be getting involved. The parades did continue, but they were pretty much left alone by the authorities, really. There was no real great clampdown on Orange activity in those 3 years. But, you know, it was detrimental to the Orange Order, I suppose, especially in the fact that they just weren't ready to actually oppose the granting of Catholic emancipation in any sort of real way. So they sort of missed a trick, really, I suppose, in comparison to O'Connell during that period.
Thank you. During the famine, at the start of the famine, you were talking about the lack of numbers in Belfast, and the other parade was at Lisburn.
Yeah, yeah.
You were saying that did announcements go out telling people to stay away because of the diseases?
They
Was that
did,
the
yeah.
case?
Yeah, the announcement did go out. A lot of people, like, you know, the Reverend Hartley Hudson in Lisburn, for example, said, you know, do not go out. Number one, you're sort of going to incur the wrath of God. God is not going to be happy with this thing. But also, it was seen at a practical level as well. It was recognized that typhus could be spread by the gathering of people in groups. So again, that is also told through newspaper announcements, for example, just stay at home, this isn't the time, but people weren't really prepared to listen to that 100%.
Joe asked, was the Orange Order formed in the Diamond?
Yeah, after the Battle of the Diamond in 1795 at Dan Wunter's Inn, it happened. Yeah, after a clash between ribbonmen, or well, actually they were called defenders at that stage, Catholic defenders and Orangemen. Basically, the defenders laid siege to Dan Wunter's Inn, but they were routed by the superior firepower of the Orangemen inside. There's a bit of a scare actually to the Orangemen, because a lot of these defenders had come from a long distance to actually attack the inn, and they were well organized, whereas the Orangemen weren't really that well organized. So they sort of made the decision pretty much right away, right, we're going to organize into lodges, all that sort of stuff. And that really was the point onwards that it was set up. Yeah.
Okay. Before that, what kind of orange structure was there?
What sort of?
Before the formation of the Orange Order at Dan Wunter's cottage,
Yeah.
what came before that?
Well, there was, of course, in that particular, that Armagh, North Armagh area, you had the Peabody Boys. They were a Protestant sort of a secret militia group that was sort of trying to terrorize Catholic weavers. So they would break into Catholic weavers' houses. A lot of this is economic, rather than sectarian, maybe competition from Catholic weavers. They would break into Catholic houses at night and smash up their looms or their weaving equipment, etc. So you did have those Peabody Boys in existence, and yes, there would be clashes between those and defenders. Before that as well, you also had Protestant, well, they're more mixed organizations. Hearts of Oak, for example, Steel Boys, those sort of things, they were organizations that could come together to actually oppose landlords. For instance, things like potato prices and that, they could be actually protested against. So that's what I was saying about the relationship being on sort of a bit of a slippery slope, because the tenants were prepared to oppose their own landlords on occasion. So the relationship wasn't as solid as it previously would have been.
Dead on. Okay, Eddie, he says, or he asks you a question here. What was the command and leadership structure of the order in the early 1800s? How dominant were the leadership?
In the early part of the 1800s, well, after 1798, you do get the elites coming on board, and you do see the Grand Masters really from the, I would say, about county organization levels upwards, positions were taken by the elites. So you've got your local lodge, yes, lower classes. The lower class guy could be the Grand Master of a local lodge. Next one up was the district Grand Master. Still could be from the lower to middle classes, but more generally someone like a magistrate or a better class. County level then, yes, you're going to have one of the elites is going to be in leadership there. And of course, provincial level, definitely. National level, absolutely, definitely. So there was, for the lower classes, some level of leadership available at local lodge level. You got to remember as well, a lot of these lodges are meeting in pubs at the time because they don't have their own they don't have their own halls at this stage. So a lot of the time, the local publican might be the lodge master.
Dead on. Thank you. Larry, he says, initially the Orange Order was opposed to the Act of Union. So he says, when and why did they become unionists?
Yeah, a lot of the Orangemen and a lot of the elites were actually opposed to the Act of Union because they saw the loss of the Dublin Parliament as, being not good news for them and their sort of patronage, stroke corruption, or whatever you want to call it. So, yeah, it probably took maybe the next sort of 10 years or so. And, it's wartime pretty much. You've got Napoleon there. In wartime, you're always going to have a boom economy. So the links with London and Ireland being within the Union it leads to a boom economy in Ireland, in Ulster. So they see that these links with London, being under London, isn't actually that bad. It's actually fine. We're doing pretty well out of it economically. And they sort of lose their desire to, maintain a parliament in Dublin. For a lot of Presbyterians as well, it's kind of a heads down time after 1798. They can't really sort of, protest in any great way. But a lot of people do very well at this time. And it's where you get this sort of Presbyterian sort of middle class building up, through mercantile pursuits. But they're not having the same actual rights as Church of Ireland members. So when Catholic emancipation comes around in 1829, it actually benefits Presbyterians just as much, probably. So yeah, economically, it's probably, economics is probably the reason why the Act of Union was accepted after a few years.
Yeah. Darragh, or sorry, Liam asks, he's wondering the nature of the source of the material you use for your monograph.
Yeah, surprisingly enough, there wasn't an awful lot in the Grand Lodge in Belfast to look at. A lot of the records they have only sort of really survived from 1850 onwards. So it wasn't really a great help for me. I got a few bits and pieces. Probably better for me were the outreach reports in the National Archives in Dublin, the police reports, what you're talking about, local events, local parades, etc., local characters, newspapers as well, newspaper sources, very good as well.
Okay. He continues about the membership of the Church of Ireland in the Orange Order and the Presbyterians. What kind of respectively numbers, or how many Church of Ireland compared to Presbyterian was members in that early?
It still would have been pretty much dominated by Church of Ireland to a large extent. Within Presbyterianism, there's a lot of sort of stuff going on at this time as well. There's a lot of sort of breakaway groups and, different things happening. So, for example, say Reverend Henry Cook is saying, yeah, let's all join together, Church of Ireland Presbyterians, let's all join together and fight off O'Connell. But this isn't, sort of the general Presbyterian sort of standpoint. There's a lot of different views within the whole wider Presbyterian church. They don't always agree. They don't always get on with each other. They certainly don't always get on with the Church of Ireland. So membership from within Presbyterians probably didn't really take off until about the 1830s with that Hillsborough meeting when Henry Cook said, let's get together. But Henry Cook, again, was only representing a small portion of the wider Presbyterian sort of family. So it is difficult to say really, what the breakdown was.
I suppose after 1798, how long then did it take for the Orange Order to become accepted more by Presbyterianism within it? Did it take long?
Yeah, it probably did take, maybe 15, 20 years to sort of be accepted. After 1798, Presbyterians are viewed with a certain suspicion because of their involvement in 1798 and the rebellion. So again, it's this whole economic thing. The fact that Presbyterians, some of them anyway, are doing well from this economic boom during the Napoleonic Wars. This makes them more acceptable because there's no way that they're going to want to leave the Union given how well they're doing economically. So they really do sort of make it their business to make their support for the Union sort of public. Yeah. And once then, of course, when Catholic emancipation gets granted, that's a big plus for them as well. So why would they want to ever leave the Union after that?
Dead on. Aaron, he says, what about the role of the Brunswick clubs during the years that the order was outlawed?
Yeah, the Brunswick clubs came into being in that period, 1825 to 28. The problem with Brunswick clubs, yes, they're set up to oppose Daniel O'Connell, but Brunswick clubs are really only for the elites. They're another one of these organizations that only cater for the better classes. The lower classes don't have any say in the Brunswick clubs, and Brunswick clubs basically don't have any, how would you call it? They don't have any muscle. They're none there that they can use to actually, writing petitions, sending petitions and sending thousands of signatures off to London. Okay, well and good, but what good is it really though, compared to having a few, militia groups of yeomanry or whatever that can physically go out there and fight against this Catholic incursion. So it turned out that the Brunswick clubs were a bit impotent really when it came to sort of standing up for Protestantism.
Thank you very much. James Duffy, he chats there about how were the lodges allowed to farm in the military? Did they back in the Napoleonic times, were they in them in the Royal Irish Regiment? Did they have?
Well, clubs? They weren't actually officially. They weren't there. You see, that was the problem. They weren't officially allowed. You see that problem with having societies within the military. It was aimed at Catholic ribbon societies being within. That was the big danger. The fact that Catholic ribbon societies existed within the military, because they've got easy access to arms, etc. So pretty much Orange Lodges were formed in the military. I mean, in secret, naturally enough, they weren't allowed, but they were probably tolerated because, Orange Lodges weren't exactly ever going to cause the military any trouble anyway. But it was just something, again, it was aimed at Catholic ribbon men, but by connection, the Orange Lodges were also included in this. And it gave the government a perfect excuse to go about outlawing the Orange Order, which is exactly what they wanted. So they had the ammunition there to do that.
Some of their mentions, Bandon in West Cork had a very strong Orange Lodge.
Yeah. Bandon was a sort of an Orange stronghold down in Cork. The Earl of Bandon himself was an Orange leader down there. And there was a number of lodges around Cork. Cork would have been strong enough around that Bandon area. And, they did have parades and processions in Bandon, and a few of those protest meetings from the 1830s were held in Bandon. But I suppose, the main strength obviously always remained in Ulster.
Okay. Darragh, he says, okay, so you've mentioned class discrimination, but might it not have been more internal Protestant discrimination?
Protestants discriminating against Protestants?
Well, I suppose the different classes, you've got the Protestants, upper class landowners discriminate against the normal Church of Ireland tenants.
Yeah.
I think. I'm not sure.
Well, there was class differences,
There always was.
There always was, yeah. There wasn't, Protestant landlords kind of became less and less worried about who they rented to. You know, they had no problem renting to Catholics anymore as long as they could come up with the money. You know, they didn't care. So maybe that's probably something else that undermined the relationships. Whereas
Okay.
previously they might have been just renting, well, some still did rent to actual, you know, Protestants only in the previous century.
Okay, dead on. Derek here, he's said all the way around, Stephen, upper class more likely to be Church of Ireland. Well, all upper classes were Church of Ireland, really,
Yeah,
weren't they?
yeah. They were, yeah.
I'm not too sure about that question.
Don't
But
know.
I think that's really it.
Yeah.
I suppose you went on a lot about the better classes, and I suppose in saying the better classes, you really meant the upper classes, didn't you? The
Yeah, the
landowning
upper
elite.
classes. Yeah, yeah. Sort of.
Maybe that's what was trying to get across
Right.
here.
Yeah.
But I think that's it for today. There was a lot of very good comments there. Thank you from Spain, from Canada, from
Yeah.
New Zealand. Someone wants to get in contact with you from New Zealand, so I took a photograph of it and I'll send you,
All
after I
right.
talk
Yeah.
to you.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
where can you get the book at?
Well, it's going to be very soon available from Four Courts Press. So if you go onto their website, Four Courts, you will see their their advertisements for it, and it's due to be published now any day. So with the bookshops now been closed down, I guess
Amazon.
online, yeah, Amazon and Four Courts, yeah, Four Courts Press. I think they have a link there for it, and I think there is an actual reduction on it for the first few weeks or whatever. So that'll be the best bet to look at.
Yeah.
Four Courts Press, yeah.
There on Darragh. Well, here, thank you for coming on. That was a very interesting talk. Well, I really enjoyed it anyway, and I learned
Yeah.
some more,
Oh,
add
sure, yeah.
wee bit of knowledge I had.
Yeah, oh well, that's the main thing. Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me anyway.
There's Michael clapping for you up there. I suppose thank you from Transnatura and Limavady Valley Area Ancestry, and thank you for everybody who tuned in to watch. And I suppose the next talk is on Monday, and it's on Cromwell, and it'll certainly be an interesting one to sign in on. Okay, thank you very much again to everybody. All the best and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Cheers.